Media fact checker. Australia faces rising inflation and economic risks due to Middle East war-driven fuel price surges. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Fuel prices in Australia have risen by about 40% since Israel and the US began bombing Iran in late February 2024, effectively closing the Strait of Hormuz and disrupting 20% of global oil trade. ABC, John Gunn, Guardian, Jonathan Kearns. Diesel prices in nearly every Australian capital city have passed $3 per litre, Guardian. The Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, has raised interest rates twice in 2024, with the cash rate now at 4.1%, and economists predict further hikes. ABC, John Gunn, Guardian, Jonathan Kearns. Official inflation in Australia is currently at 3.7%, but economists forecast it will spike to 4.3% in the March 2024 quarter and above 5% in the June 2024 quarter. ABC, Diana Musina, Guardian, Jonathan Kearns. The ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Index has dropped to its lowest level in 50 years, falling 17.1 points since the war began. ABC, John Gunn, Guardian. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports AMP economists forecast a 30% chance of recession in the next 12 months, while Guardian does not mention this specific percentage or AMP's recession outlook. ABC states the RBA cash rate is at 4.1% and Capital Economics predicts it could rise to 4.6%, but Guardian does not reference Capital Economics' prediction specifically. ABC highlights excuseflation as a concern from AMP economists, while Guardian does not mention this term or this specific warning. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Former AFL player Leigh Ryswyk becomes first openly gay male AFL player. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Leigh Ryswyk is the first past or present male AFL player to come out as gay. Ryswyk played one AFL match for the Brisbane Lions in 2005 against Fremantle at Subiaco Oval. He was delisted by the Brisbane Lions at the end of the 2005 season after his AFL debut. Ryswyk played 226 matches for North Adelaide in the SANFL and is a life member of the club. Ryswyk came out publicly during an interview on Joy 94.9's GayFL radio program in 2024. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between sources regarding factual claims. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian and SBS News. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australia's diplomatic and economic response to Iran's attacks on Gulf states and Strait of Hormuz. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Australia's UN Ambassador Claire Walsh condemned Iran's indiscriminate attacks on Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, states and Jordan, including targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure, during an urgent UN debate. Australia co-sponsored a Middle East-led UN resolution calling for Iran to cease attacks immediately, with Walsh stating we recognise the profound impact that Iran's actions are having on civilian populations in the region. Iran has targeted oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, disrupting global oil supply and raising fuel prices worldwide, with Australia experiencing extreme fuel shortages and hundreds of service stations running dry. Australia has deployed a military reconnaissance plane, dozens of defence personnel, and missiles to the United Arab Emirates at its request, though the Albanese government has ruled out joining offensive action against Iran. Iran rejected a 15-point US peace plan and released a counteroffer demanding complete Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz, with Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stating Iran has no intention of negotiating for now. But not all outlets told the same story. Newscomer reports Australia's UN statement explicitly condemned Iran's human rights violations and internet blackouts, while Guardian's version of the statement omits these details entirely. Newscomer attributes a direct quote from Claire Walsh about Iran's weaponization of the Strait of Hormuz impacting global oil prices, but Guardian does not include this specific phrasing or economic framing. News Kamau includes White House threats to unleash hell on Iran, while Guardian does not reference these specific US warnings or Trump's alleged comments about military defeat. This story was covered by The Guardian and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Cyclone Narelle disrupts Australia's LNG and gas production amid global energy shortages. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Cyclone Narelle caused outages at Chevron's Gorgon and Wheatstone LNG plants in Western Australia's Pilbara region, with Wheatstone going offline around midday Thursday and Gorgon experiencing a partial outage around 3 p.m. Thursday. Chevron evacuated offshore workers from Wheatstone, 225 kilometers offshore, and Barrow Island, 50 kilometers offshore, facilities by Tuesday and Thursday respectively, operating remotely after evacuations. Santos LNG plant on Varanus Island, 75 kilometers offshore, was knocked offline by Cyclone Narelle, with winds reaching 180 kilometers per hour early Thursday evening. Woodside's Karratha gas plant suffered a production interruption, contributing to the shutdown of nearly two-thirds of WA's domestic gas supply over the past 3 months, per Australian energy market operator. WA Energy Minister Amberjade Sanderson stated that LNG operators are well prepared for cyclones and there is no disruption to domestic gas supply, with no reports of damage to date. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states Santos Darwin LNG plant was already offline for upgrades before the cyclone, while ABC does not mention this pre-existing outage. ABC reports Cyclone Narelle intensified to Category 4 strength on Thursday, but News Kamau does not specify the cyclone's peak intensity. News Kamau claims no reports of damage to date, while ABC highlights specific wind gusts, 159 km per hour on Barrow Island, 180 km per hour on Varanus Island, and production interruptions. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. First NFL regular season game in Australia at MCG on September 11th. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The first NFL regular season game in Australia will be played between the Los Angeles Rams and San Francisco 49ers. The match will take place at the Melbourne Cricket Ground, MCG, on Friday, September 11th, 2025. Kickoff time is 10:35 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. General admission tickets start at $140, with standing room tickets at $95. Ticket pre-sales open on April 1st, 2025, at 9 a.m., with general sales on April 8th, 2025, at 10 a.m. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1, ABC, incorrectly states the game is the first NRL regular season game in Australia, while all sources confirm it is the first NFL game. Article 3, News Kamau, states the game is the NFL opening round, which is misleading as it is a regular season game. Article 1, ABC, mentions the game may force AFL to reconsider its semi-final weekend schedule, but does not provide specifics on how this would happen. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. South Australia wins back-to-back Sheffield Shield cricket titles by defeating Victoria in a dramatic final. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. South Australia won the Sheffield Shield final against Victoria at Melbourne's Junction Oval. The match was played over 5 days with South Australia needing 5 wickets and Victoria 94 runs away from victory at the start of Day 5. South Australia won by 56 runs in the final. Alex Carey scored a century, 103, on Day 4 for South Australia. Henry Thornton took the final 2 wickets of Will Sutherland and Fergus O'Neill in the final innings. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states South Australia needed 5 wickets and Victoria 94 runs away from victory at the start of Day 5, while Article 3 states South Australia needed 196 runs to win and were bowled out for 139. Article 1 says South Australia needed 5 wickets and Victoria 94 runs away from victory at the start of Day 5, but Article 3 says Victoria was 94 runs away from winning at the start of Day 5, implying South Australia needed 196 runs. Article 1 mentions South Australia won by 56 runs, but Article 3 does not explicitly state the margin of victory, only that South Australia won by 56 runs in the summary. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. American journalist Shelly Kittleson kidnapped in Baghdad by Iranian-backed militia. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Shelly Kittleson, a freelance journalist based in Rome, was kidnapped in Baghdad on February 27, 2024. Kittleson had worked for Al Monitor and reported extensively from Syria and Iraq. An arrested suspect has ties to the Iranian-backed militia group Kataib Hezbollah. Iraqi authorities intercepted a vehicle belonging to the kidnappers that overturned during a chase. The U.S. State Department warned Kittleson about threats prior to the abduction and advised Americans to leave Iraq. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC do not specify the exact location of the abduction beyond Baghdad, while Newscomau states it occurred near the Baghdad Hotel and Green Zone. The Guardian mentions the U.S. State Department fulfilled our duty to warn Kittleson, while Newscomau attributes the warning to the Trump administration sources. The Guardian states the journalist was not in the overturned vehicle, but Newscomau does not mention this detail. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Ilya Malinin wins third straight world figure skating title after Olympic collapse. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Ilya Malinin won the 2024 World Figure Skating Championship on Saturday in Prague's O2 Arena with a total score of 329.40. Malinin's short program score was a personal best of 111.29, putting him over 9 points ahead of the field after Thursday's session. Malinin's free skate score was 218.11, finishing ahead of Yumi Kagiyama, 306.67 total, and Shun Soto, 288.54 total. Malinin landed 5 quadruple jumps in his free program, including a quad toe triple toe combination and a backflip. Malinin placed 8th in the Olympic free skate in Milan after falling twice, a major upset from his favored position. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states Malinin's free skate score was 218.11, but Article 2 does not provide this specific number. Article 1 reports Kagiyama's total score as 306.67, while Article 2 does not mention Kagiyama's total score. Article 1 describes Malinin's short program as including a quad flip and quad lutz triple toe combination, but Article 2 only mentions the quad flip and quad lutz triple toe combination without specifying the flip. This story was covered by The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Queensland Government finalises 2032 Brisbane Olympics rowing venue at Rockhampton's Fitzroy River. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Rockhampton's Fitzroy River has been selected as the sole venue for Olympic rowing at the 2032 Brisbane Games, with no alternative sites in contention according to Deputy Premier Jared Bleegey and the Games Independent Infrastructure and Coordination Authority, JICA. World Rowing President Jean-Christophe Roland and International Canoeing Federation President Thomas Konietzko publicly endorsed the Fitzroy River as the venue for flatwater rowing and canoeing in 2032. The preferred field of play for the Fitzroy River venue includes a full 2-kilometre competition course with a southern finish line downstream toward the Fitzroy Barrage, as stated by Deputy Premier Jared Bleegey and confirmed by JICA. The total budget for Olympic venues, including the Fitzroy River upgrades, is contained within the $7.1 billion funding agreement between the Queensland and federal governments. The Brisbane Stadium site at Victoria Park has been confirmed for the Arve end of the venue, with construction fencing and earthworks set to begin immediately from June 1, 2024, as reported by both sources. But not all outlets told the same story. Newscomau states the Fitzroy River venue will be a permanent legacy facility and is contained within the $7.1 billion budget, but does not specify whether the $7.1 billion includes all venue upgrades or just a portion of it, while ABC confirms the $7.1 billion covers all venues and legacy infrastructure beyond 2032. Newscomau explicitly rejects the idea that the Fitzroy River upgrade could cost $500 million but does not provide an alternative cost estimate, whereas ABC does not mention a $500 million figure or provide a cost comparison. Newscomau mentions that the Gabba Stadium will be demolished after 2032 and replaced with houses, with minimal cricket upgrades, but ABC does not explicitly state the fate of the Gabba beyond its use during the Olympics. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Northern Territory records multiple deaths in custody and alleged stabbing incidents within a week. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A 26-year-old man died at Darwin Correctional Centre on Saturday morning, 7:50 a.m., after being found unresponsive in his cell. Medical assistance was provided but he was declared deceased at the scene. The death at Darwin Correctional Centre is the second in custody in less than a week in the Northern Territory. A 25-year-old Indigenous man died in police custody on Tuesday after being arrested at Taiwi Gardens Retirement Village in Darwin's northern suburbs and experiencing breathing difficulties in the back of a police vehicle. The 25-year-old man was pronounced dead at Royal Darwin Hospital at 10:10 p.m. on Tuesday after receiving CPR and ambulance treatment. A 19-year-old man died in Katherine on Sunday evening from a serious stab wound while in police care, marking the third death in custody in less than a week. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC and news.com.au both report the 19-year-old victim was found in a vehicle with stab wounds, but news.com.au specifies the attack was allegedly on the street while ABC does not mention this detail. The Guardian states the 25-year-old man was arrested following reports of an assault at a retirement village, while ABC describes it as reports of trouble without specifying an assault. ABC and news.com.au both report the 19-year-old victim died at Catherine's Temporary Field Hospital, but only news.com.au mentions the field hospital was set up in preparation for Cyclone Narelle. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Travel expenses and affordability of Albania compared to other European destinations. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Albania is described as Europe's most affordable destination for travelers during summer 2023. The writer spent a week in Albania with an Irish friend named Johnny during late northern summer. The exchange rate during the trip was $1 equals 55 cents and 54 Albanian lek, later updated to 60 cents and 57 lek. The writer visited Tirana, Vlorë, Gjirokastër, and Sarand during the trip. The Tirana Marriott Hotel is centrally located within a football field in downtown Tirana. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two articles as they are identical in content. This story was covered by Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Democratic victory in Florida State House election flips Trump-backed district. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Emily Gregory, Democrat, defeated John Maples, Republican, in Florida's 87th State House District special election on the 11th of June, 2025, winning by 2.4 percentage points, 797 votes. The district includes Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Palm Beach County, where the Republican incumbent previously won by 19 percentage points in 2024. Donald Trump voted by mail in the special election despite publicly criticizing mail-in voting as fraudulent, including during a 2025 event in Tennessee. The Associated Press called the race for Emily Gregory on the 11th of June, 2025, with her leading by over 2 percentage points. Emily Gregory is a public health expert and small business owner with no prior elected office experience. But not all outlets told the same story. Guardian 1 states Emily Gregory won by more than 2 percentage points, while ABC specifies 2.4 percentage points. Guardian 3 claims Democrats have flipped more than 24 legislative districts since Trump's 2025 election, while Guardian 1 and ABC state 29 districts. ABC reports Trump's spokesperson said he primarily lives at the White House, while Guardian 1 does not mention this distinction. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian court hearing on extradition of Chilean torture suspect Adriana Rivas. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Adriana Rivas is a 72-year-old Australian resident accused of kidnapping and torture during Chile's Pinochet dictatorship in the 1970s. Chile formally requested her extradition in 2014, and she has been in detention in Australia since 2019 awaiting removal. A two-day federal court hearing began on Monday, June 2024, before Justice Michael Lee to consider her final extradition appeal. Prosecutors allege Rivas was involved in the kidnapping, interrogation, and disappearances of 7 victims at Simon Bolivar Barracks, a torture center. Rivas fled Chile in 2011 while on bail and arrived in Australia in 2012, working as a nanny in Bondi. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports previously unreported emails suggest an Australian consular official aided Rivas's escape, but DFAT denies any record of such assistance. ABC cites Rivas's 2012 email to a minister stating consular officials helped me all the way, while DFAT claims no record exists of this knowledge or involvement. No contradictions found between SBS articles 2 and 3 beyond redundant phrasing. This story was covered by ABC News and SBS News. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Japanese Grand Prix 2026 qualifying results and race setup with Mercedes front row lockout. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Kimi Antonelli qualified on pole position, 1 minute and 28.778 seconds, for the Japanese Grand Prix, 0.298 seconds ahead of teammate George Russell. Mercedes locked out the front row for the third consecutive race in 2026 with Antonelli, pole, and Russell, second. Oscar Piastri qualified third for McLaren, 0.354 seconds behind Antonelli, ABC, and 0.360 seconds behind Antonelli, Guardian. Charles Leclerc qualified fourth for Ferrari, with Lewis Hamilton sixth, ABC, Guardian. Lando Norris qualified fifth for McLaren, behind Piastri and Leclerc, Guardian, ABC. But not all outlets told the same story. Guardian Article 2 states Liam Lawson qualified 13th, 0.3 seconds faster than Lindblad, but Guardian Article 3 does not mention Lawson's qualifying position. Guardian Article 2 reports Verstappen was 1.548 seconds behind Hülkenberg in FP3, while Guardian Article 5 does not specify FP3 times for Verstappen. ABC states Piastri was 0.354 seconds behind Antonelli, while Guardian Article 5 states Piastri was 0.360 seconds behind Antonelli. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. 2 men acquitted of raping intoxicated woman picked up while waiting for Uber in Darwin. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Panormitis Charalampis and Michael Vruvis were acquitted on all charges of sexual intercourse without consent by a jury in the Northern Territory Supreme Court after almost 7 hours of deliberation. The men faced 4 counts each of sexual intercourse without consent after picking up the woman outside a nightclub in Darwin in January 2024. The woman alleged she was severely intoxicated, in and out of consciousness, and unable to consent, with blood alcohol levels estimated between 0.1 and 0.2 when she arrived at the apartment. CCTV footage showed the woman crawling and needing assistance to walk before being taken to the men's car, contradicting her claim of being carried. The trial took place in the Northern Territory Supreme Court in Darwin, with closing arguments delivered by Crown Prosecutor Rebecca Everett and defense lawyers Beth Wild and Stephen Robson SC. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states the woman's memory was completely wrong and unreliable based on CCTV footage, while Article 2 does not explicitly state this conclusion from the judge. Article 1 mentions the woman's mother and housemate testified during the trial, but Article 2 does not mention their testimony. Article 1 includes the detail that the men remained in the apartment for 8.5 hours, while Article 2 does not specify the duration beyond the night of January 14, 2024. This story was covered by ABC News. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Israeli death penalty law for Palestinians sparks UN and international condemnation. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The Israeli Knesset passed a law on Monday allowing the death penalty for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank convicted of deadly terror attacks by military courts, with executions to occur within 90 days of sentencing. The law does not apply to Jewish extremists accused of similar crimes, creating a discriminatory two-tiered justice system. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk stated the law is patently inconsistent with Israel's international law obligations and that its application in the occupied Palestinian territory would constitute a war crime. The legislation was passed by a simple majority in military courts without requiring prosecutor requests or unanimity, and includes severe restrictions on legal consultations, video only, and visitation rights, only authorized personnel. Israel's last execution was in 1962, when Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann was hanged. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian mentions the bill was amended by a security committee before passing its first vote, while ABC does not mention this amendment explicitly. The Guardian states the law was passed on Monday by the Knesset, but ABC does not specify the exact date of passage beyond late on Monday. The Guardian reports the bill was backed by National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who wears a noose-shaped lapel pin, while ABC does not mention Ben-Gvir or the lapel pin. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian TGA proposes sunscreen regulation reforms after SPF testing controversies. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The Therapeutic Goods Administration, TGA, proposed reforms to Australian sunscreen regulations following choice testing that found 16 out of 20 popular SPF 50 SPF 50+ sunscreens failed to meet advertised SPF claims in June 2023. Choice tested 20 SPF 50 SPF 50+ sunscreens and found 16 delivered lower SPF than labeled, with results ranging from SPF 4 to SPF 43 instead of the claimed SPF 50+. The TGA revealed unreliable SPF testing data from certain laboratories and manufacturers' lack of understanding of legal obligations in its report. Australia has the highest rates of skin cancer and melanoma globally, with around 2,000 deaths annually, prompting the TGA to emphasize the importance of sunscreen regulation. The TGA proposed simplifying SPF labels to low, medium, high, or very high protection categories to address consumer confusion about SPF values. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states ultraviolet sunscreen tested at SPF 4, while ABC does not mention this specific product's test result. News Kamau highlights the TGA's proposal to simplify labels to low, medium, high, or very high as a key focus, but ABC emphasizes the TGA's acknowledgement of potential drawbacks like legislative amendments and industry investment. News Kamau mentions the TGA's report stating current understanding of SPF values, combined with the variability of test results, while ABC does not quote this exact phrasing. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Massive anti-Trump protests across U.S. states, including West Virginia, amid midterm concerns. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Over 3,200 coordinated No Kings protests were scheduled across all 50 U.S. states on Saturday. Donald Trump won West Virginia in 2016, 2020, and 2024, including Jefferson County, Charlestown, and Berkeley County, Martinsburg. A Reuters Ipsos poll showed Trump's approval rating at 36%, with 62% disapproving of his performance. Protests occurred outside the historic Jefferson County Courthouse in Charlestown, West Virginia. Stephen Miller, Trump's deputy chief of staff, was a target of protests due to his role in the administration's immigration crackdown. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two sources. This story was covered by Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. AFL player Tristan Xerri suspended for blood-wiping incident against Essendon captain Andrew McGrath. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Tristan Xerri was suspended for 3 matches after pleading guilty to serious misconduct for wiping blood on Andrew McGrath's face during the North Melbourne vs Essendon match on the 13th of April, 2025 at Docklands Stadium. Xerri admitted to the AFL tribunal that he knew there was blood on his hand before wiping it on McGrath's face and that he had spoken to McGrath to apologise afterward. The incident occurred after Xerri was sledged with homophobic slurs, weak C-word, effing flopping C-word, by Essendon players and after he was physically shoved by McGrath during a scuffle. Tribunal Chair Jeff Gleeson KC labelled Xerri's act as disgraceful behaviour and noted Xerri's hand was close to McGrath's open mouth. Xerri's suspension means he will miss North Melbourne's matches against Carlton, Good Friday, Brisbane, and Richmond. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1, ABC, states Xerri was suspended for 3 matches after pleading guilty, while Article 3, ABC, and Article 4, Guardian, describe the case as being sent directly to the tribunal with a lengthy suspension still pending at the time of reporting. Article 2, Thege, suggests Xerri could face a longer suspension than Buckley's 1-match ban, while Article 4, Guardian, explicitly states Gleeson KC ruled Buckley's incident was quite significantly less serious. Article 1, ABC, reports Xerri's suspension as finalised at 3 matches, but Article 2, Thege, states Xerri is in danger of a multiple-week suspension as of the article's publication date. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Victorian government expands classroom device ban to include smartwatches, headphones across all schools. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Premier Jacinta Allen announced sweeping new device bans in Victorian schools on Wednesday morning, 2023. Mobile phones have been banned in Victorian public schools since January 2020. The new policy banning smartwatches, headphones, and phones will take effect on January 27, 2027. Education Minister Ben Carroll stated the phone ban in public schools improved student distraction rates, focus, and socialization. Smartwatches with notifications, recording functions, or internet connectivity will be banned under the new policy. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states the ban applies to private schools while ABC refers to independent schools, no explicit mention of private schools in ABC. News Kamau does not mention the 60% statistic about smartwatch usage among children aged 7 to 12, which ABC cites from Ben Carroll. ABC highlights mixed parental views and concerns about the ban's breadth, while News Kamau does not mention any parental opposition or mixed views. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Legal battle between Kyle Sandilands, Jackie Henderson, and ARN Media over contract terminations. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Kyle Sandilands was terminated from his $100 million 10-year contract with ARN Media Kiss FM in March 2024 after an on-air incident with Jackie Henderson on February 20, 2024. Sandilands and Henderson had a 25-year partnership on the Kyle and Jackie O Show, which was the top-rated breakfast radio act in Sydney for 20 years. ARN Media terminated Henderson's contract on March 3, 2024, citing her inability to work with Sandilands and psychosocial health safety concerns, and gave Sandilands a 14-day deadline to remedy the situation before terminating his contract. Sandilands filed a federal court claim on March 20, 2024, arguing his termination was invalid and seeking reinstatement and unpaid $85 million plus under the contract. Henderson filed a separate federal court claim on March 23, 2024, seeking at least $82.25 million in compensation for wrongful termination under the Fair Work Act. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC describe Sandilands' lawyer seeking to frame the case as narrow, 20 minutes of conduct, while ARN's lawyer argues it requires a broader review of prior incidents and a jury trial. The Guardian reports ARN's barrister saying the prospect of Sandilands returning to air is vanishingly small, but Sandilands' lawyer claims he is ready to return immediately and the show would continue as normal. The Guardian states ARN's cross-claim involves Sandilands being overpaid and owing money, while Sandilands' lawyers argue he was owed $85 million plus and had no opportunity to remedy the situation after Henderson's contract was terminated. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. US-Iran war escalation with Trump's threats and diplomatic tensions. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Donald Trump threatened to obliterate Iran's electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island if a ceasefire deal is not reached by April 6, per Guardian and ABC. Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei stated US peace proposals were excessive, unrealistic and irrational, Guardian, and unrealistic, illogical and excessive, ABC, following talks with Pakistan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey on April 5. Iran has not engaged in direct negotiations with the US, only through intermediaries, Guardian, ABC. Israel and the US launched strikes on Iran, including targets in Tehran and infrastructure used by Iran-backed Hezbollah in Beirut, ABC, Guardian. Oil prices are on track for a record monthly rise, with Brent crude up 54% since March, Guardian. But not all outlets told the same story. Guardian reports Trump's deadline is April 6, but News Kamal states Trump extended the deadline to agree to a ceasefire until the 6th of April without specifying the original date. ABC states no decision has been made to send troops into Iran, while Guardian implies preparations for ground operations are underway, e.g., Pentagon reports. Guardian mentions Trump's preference to take the oil in Iran as requiring US troops to seize Karg Island, but ABC does not explicitly link this to ground operations. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian government halving fuel excise amid global fuel crisis due to Iran war. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The Australian government halved the fuel excise on petrol and diesel from 52.6 cents per litre to 26.3 cents per litre, effective April 1, 2025, for 3 months until June 30, 2025. The excise cut is expected to reduce fuel prices by 26.3 cents per litre, saving motorists approximately $19 on a 65-litre tank of petrol. The heavy vehicle road user charge was also reduced to zero for 3 months to support truck drivers, costing the government an additional $53 million in lost revenue. The total cost of the excise cut and road user charge reduction to taxpayers is estimated at $2.55 billion, depending on demand levels. The fuel excise cut was announced after a national cabinet meeting involving state and territory leaders, with the plan divided into 4 stages: plan and prepare, keeping Australia moving, taking targeted action, and protecting critical services. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian reported that fuel prices in capital cities dropped immediately after the excise cut announcement, while ABC and other sources stated that the full benefit would take days to weeks to flow through. The coalition, via Newscomau, claimed the excise cut would save families up to $50 per week, while ABC and other sources estimated savings of around $19 for a 65-litre tank. The Guardian mentioned that Victoria and Tasmania would make public transport free, but ABC and Newscomau reported that NSW and WA declined to follow suit, with no explicit mention of Victoria and Tasmania in those sources. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, news.com.au, and SBS News. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australia warns Israel against occupying southern Lebanon amid escalating conflict with Hezbollah. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong warned Israel against occupying southern Lebanon in calls with Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar on March 2024. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz announced plans to create a security zone between the Israeli border, Blue Line, and the Litani River in southern Lebanon. Over 1,000 Lebanese civilians have been killed since Israel began striking Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, including more than 100 children and 40 medics, Lebanon's health ministry data. More than 1 million Lebanese civilians have been displaced due to the conflict in southern Lebanon. Australia has urged Australians in Lebanon to leave now if it is safe to do so. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC and Guardian report that Australia has urged Australians in Lebanon to leave now if it is safe to do so, but Newscomau does not explicitly state this exact phrasing. ABC and Guardian mention that Australia has sanctioned Bezalel Smotrich for inciting violence and Palestinian human rights abuses, but Newscomau does not mention this sanction explicitly. ABC states that 2 Israeli soldiers have been killed fighting in Lebanon, while Newscomau and Guardian do not mention this specific number of Israeli military deaths. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Arrest and charges in Sydney grandfather's mistaken identity kidnapping and murder case. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Declan James Donnelly, 23, was arrested on March 6 at a Seven Hills home and charged with murder and kidnapping of Chris Bagdasarian, an 85-year-old grandfather mistakenly abducted from North Ryde on February 13. Bagdasarian's body was found near a golf course in Pitt Town, Sydney's northwest, on February 24, 11 days after his abduction. Donnelly was found wearing only his underwear during his arrest, and an sawn-off shotgun, ammunition, and prohibited drugs, heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, cannabis, were allegedly found at the Seven Hills property. Gerard Andrews, 29, and Daniel Stevens, 24, were charged in February with Bagdasarian's kidnapping and murder, and remain in custody without entering pleas. Janice Thurston, 23, Donnelly's girlfriend, was arrested alongside him for an apprehended violence order breach and sentenced to 10 months imprisonment, non-parole period of 6 months, on March 6. But not all outlets told the same story. Newscomau states Donnelly allegedly murdered Bagdasarian between February 13 morning and 9 p.m. on February 14, while SMH does not specify a time frame for the murder but implies it occurred shortly after the kidnappers realized they had the wrong man. Newscomau lists Donnelly's charges as including take detain in company with intent to ransom occasion actual bodily harm, while SMH does not mention this exact phrasing and focuses on kidnapping and murder charges. SMH claims Donnelly was contracted to kidnap another person, Dimitri Stepanyan's father, but mistakenly abducted Bagdasarian, while Newscomau does not mention a specific intended target beyond mistaken identity. This story was covered by ABC News, news.com.au, and Sydney Morning Herald. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. UK nurse Lucy Letby's murder conviction and claims of miscarriage of justice by David Davis. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Lucy Letby was convicted in 2019 of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 more while working as a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2015 to 2016. She was sentenced to 15 whole-life prison orders, and the Court of Appeal refused her permission to appeal in 2022. Letby's lawyer, Mark MacDonald, applied to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, CCRC, to revisit her case, supported by reports from 27 medical experts. The CCRC is currently reviewing the application for a potential miscarriage of justice. David Davis, a former Conservative cabinet minister, stated in Parliament that Letby has suffered a clear miscarriage of justice and criticised Cheshire Constabulary's investigation. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states Cheshire Constabulary strongly refutes all the points made during the adjournment debate by Davis, while Article 2 reports Davis as saying both former detectives now agree Letby was guilty, that is, until they examined the hard facts, implying some initial agreement with the conviction. Article 1 claims Cheshire Constabulary accused Davis of spreading misinformation, while Article 2 does not include this direct accusation but focuses on Davis's criticisms of police failures. Article 1 mentions Cheshire Constabulary's statement about a core group of individuals spreading misinformation, but Article 2 does not reference this specific group or their alleged actions. This story was covered by The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Fair Work Commission abolishes junior pay rates for 18 to 20-year-olds in Australia. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The Fair Work Commission abolished junior pay rates for workers aged 18 and over in retail, fast food, and pharmacy sectors. Around 500,000 young Australians will benefit from the wage increase, according to The Guardian and ABC. The changes apply to the General Retail Industry Award, Fast Food Industry Award, and Pharmacy Industry Award. Workers aged 20 were previously paid 90% of the adult rate, 19-year-olds 80%, and 18-year-olds 70%, Guardian and ABC. The wage adjustments will be phased in over 4 years, with the first changes starting in December, Guardian and ABC. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian mentions the 6-month employment requirement for 18 to 20-year-olds to receive the adult rate, but ABC does not mention this detail. The Guardian quotes Treasurer Jim Chalmers directly, while ABC and SBS do not include his statement. The ABC highlights the totemic impact framing from employer groups, which is not mentioned in The Guardian or SBS. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and SBS News. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Teenage assault on paramedic after stolen car crash in Melbourne. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A stolen Mazda 3 with 4 teenage males collided with a Volkswagen Jetta at Nicholson St and Victoria Parade, Carlton, just before 6 a.m. on Saturday. 2 boys fled the scene immediately after the crash. A 19-year-old man and a 15-year-old boy were injured in the crash and taken to hospital by ambulance. The 15-year-old allegedly assaulted a paramedic during transport to hospital, requiring treatment for their own injuries. The Mazda 3 was stolen from Mulgrave on March 21. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states the 19-year-old assaulted the paramedic, but ABC claims it was the 15-year-old. News Kamau refers to the injured teens as a 19-year-old man and 15-year-old boy, while ABC calls them both teenagers without specifying ages beyond the 2 on the run. ABC specifies the 19-year-old was seriously injured and the 15-year-old had minor injuries, but News Kamau does not differentiate injury severity. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Norwegian director Christopher Borgly's controversial rom-com thriller The Drama starring Zendaya and Robert Pattinson. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The film is directed by Christopher Borgly and stars Zendaya as Emma and Robert Pattinson as Charlie. The story centers on a couple engaged to be married whose relationship unravels after Emma reveals a dark secret about her past. Emma's secret involves a high school shooting plot she attempted as a 14-year-old, later abandoned due to a real shooting incident. The film is distributed by A24 and released in cinemas on April 2nd. The film's title and premise involve a taboo topic in US culture, sparking cultural debate. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC describes the film's tone as gradually revealing a more complex hand, while The Guardian calls it a contrived but amusing high-concept satire. ABC mentions the film's ending is unusually cheesy and empathetic for Borgley, but The Guardian says the ending loses its nerve and feels abrupt. ABC highlights the film's critique of millennial romance and personal branding, while The Guardian focuses more on the film's generic ambiguity between satire and thriller. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Regional Victorian Council calls for fossil fuel tax to fund climate disaster recovery. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Mount Alexander Shire Council, Regional Victorian Council, passed a motion in January 2025 calling for a national levy on coal, oil, and gas companies to fund bushfire and flood recovery, driven by Councillor Lucas Maddock. The Ravenswood fire destroyed at least 55 homes and businesses in Harcourt, population 1,000, and Ravenswood in January 2025, during a catastrophic heatwave across Victoria. Councillor Lucas Maddock narrowly escaped the Ravenswood fire, which came within 5 minutes of reaching his family home in Barkers Creek. The Mount Alexander Shire Council will lobby the Victorian Government at the State Conference in February 2025 and the Federal Labor MP Lisa Chesters, as well as Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen. Federal Assistant Climate Change Minister Josh Wilson's office acknowledged $6.3 billion directed to climate adaptation and resilience since the Albanese government took power, including a $1 billion disaster-ready fund over 5 years. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states the Ravenswood fire destroyed 55 homes and businesses, while ABC reports approximately 54 homes were destroyed. News Kamau claims the federal government's $6.3 billion climate adaptation funding includes a $1 billion disaster-ready fund over 5 years, but ABC does not mention the $1 billion figure specifically. NEWSOMEU's spokesperson for Josh Wilson emphasized renewables reducing electricity bills, while ABC's statement from Wilson's office only mentions the $100 million Community Energy Upgrades Fund without discussing bill impacts. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian political polling shows Labor's declining support amid fuel crisis and Middle East war. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Anthony Albanese's Labour government primary vote dropped to 31% in Newspoll, down from 36% in November 2023 and 34.6% at the May 2023 election. One Nation's primary vote is at 26% in Newspoll and 29% in Redbridge poll, both sources report recent figures. The Coalition's primary vote is at 21% in Newspoll and 17% in Redbridge poll, record low. 72% of voters disapprove of US military action against Iran, with 23% approving, reported by both sources. Anthony Albanese announced Australia will underwrite the purchase of additional fuel cargoes to address shortages. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 reports One Nation's primary vote at 26%, slightly down from previous, while Article 2 reports it rising to 29% in Redbridge poll. Article 1 states Labour's primary vote dropped to 31%, from 36%, while Article 2 reports Labour's support remained unchanged at 32% in Redbridge poll. Article 1 does not mention a two-party preferred lead between Labour and One Nation, but Article 2 reports Labour leading One Nation by 53% to 47%. This story was covered by news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian study links vaping to lung and oral cancer risk. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A new review led by researchers from the University of New South Wales, UNSW, found nicotine-containing vapes are likely to cause lung and oral cancers, based on evidence from 2017 to 2025. The review analysed mouse studies, human biomarker studies, oxidative stress, epigenetic changes, inflammation, and case reports, including a 19-year-old man with oral cancer linked to vaping. Australia's federal government in 2024 restricted vape sales to pharmacies for smoking cessation or nicotine dependence management only. Black market vapes in Australia often contain nicotine despite misleading labels, according to Alexander Larcombe, Curtin University, and ABC's reporting. The review did not establish a definitive epidemiological link between vaping and cancer but identified biological markers, DNA damage, inflammation, associated with cancer risk. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reported Dr. Stewart said there is still no epidemiological link between vaping and cancer, while The Guardian framed the review as finding likely cancer risk without definitive numbers. The Guardian quoted Professor Stephen Duffy as saying vaping is not as harmful as smoking due to absence of combustion products, but ABC's Alexander Larcombe stated nothing inhaled into the lungs other than fresh air is likely to be completely okay. ABC emphasized Dr. Stewart's caution that vaping as a smoking cessation tool is not established as successful, while The Guardian's Freddie Seeters implied regulators should act despite inconclusive quit vaping evidence. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian property market slowdown due to rising interest rates and economic uncertainty. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Sydney's preliminary auction clearance rate was below 60% last weekend, SMH. Mixed data, Guardian, 55%, Thege, 59% reported as below 60%, indicating a buyer's market. Melbourne's auction clearance rate was below 60% last weekend, SMH. Below threshold, Guardian, 57% nationwide with no specific Melbourne figure, Thege, 59%. The national auction clearance rate dropped to just under 57% last week, the lowest this year, Guardian. Cotality data, SMH, lowest so far this year. The Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, warned that mortgage stress could rise above 1.6% by the end of 2026 due to higher interest rates, Guardian. RBA's Financial Stability Review, SMH, economists predicting rate rises. First home buyers are withdrawing from the market, with loan market data showing a 25% drop in first-time buyers from early February to early March, Guardian. Justin Hewitt, SMH. No direct mention of 25% but notes reduced first-home buyer activity. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian reports Sydney's auction clearance rate at 55% last week, while The Age reports Melbourne's at 59%, below 60%, but SMH does not specify exact figures for either city beyond below 60%. The Guardian states the national clearance rate was just under 57% last week, while SMH describes it as the lowest so far this year without specifying the exact number. SMH reports Westpac's peak cash rate forecast at 4.85%, but The Guardian does not mention this exact figure and instead focuses on RBA rate hikes in general. This story was covered by The Guardian, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Queensland rail industrial action disrupts passenger services ahead of major track works. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. No trains will operate between Darra and Rosewood on the Ipswich line on April 1, 2024, due to industrial action. No trains will operate between Central and Cleveland on April 1, 2024, due to industrial action. Rail replacement buses will be deployed for affected lines on April 1, 2024. Queensland Rail has scheduled track closures from April 3 to April 26, 2024, for critical works on multiple rail projects, including Cross River Rail. The dispute involves enterprise bargaining negotiations for about 5,600 rail workers since January 2024. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC says Queensland Rail advised members they would not be paid if they were not performing full duties, but does not explicitly state this was a directive to avoid work. News Kamau claims Queensland Rail said members were locked out after refusing partial duties, while ABC does not mention this term or context. News Kamau reports Kat Stapleton said profusely apologized to travellers, while ABC does not include this specific phrasing. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker: Australia's fuel crisis and National Cabinet response to Middle East war disruptions. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is convening a second National Cabinet meeting on Monday, March 25, to coordinate a national response to the fuel crisis, with state premiers pushing for consistency in measures. ABC, Thij, News Kamau, SMH, ABC. As of mid-March, 470 to 520 service stations across Australia are without at least one type of fuel, with regional areas and Sydney particularly affected. ABC, News Kamau, SMH, ABC. The Strait of Hormuz closure, due to Iran war, supplies about 20 to 25% of the world's oil, and Asian refineries supplying 80% of Australia's fuel may exhaust crude oil stocks within a month. Thij, ABC. The federal government has secured additional oil shipments, 6 days' worth of diesel and 5 days' worth of petrol from emergency reserves and international sources. Thij, SMH, ABC. Energy Minister Chris Bowen announced 6 cancelled oil tankers, bound for Australia by mid-May, have been replaced, with 3 additional tankers secured. Thij, SMH, ABC. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports 520 service stations without fuel as of March 25, while Thij and News Kamau report 470 to 500 stations without fuel as of earlier dates, March 20 to 21. ABC versus Thij. News Kamau. News Kamau states 500 stations are without fuel, but ABC's March 25 update says 520 stations are affected. ABC versus News Kamau. Premier Chris Minns, NSW, says rationing could be considered in Stage 3 of the plan, while WA Premier Roger Cook says rationing would only be considered in Stage 4. News Kamau versus ABC. This story was covered by ABC News, news.com.au, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker: Australian government urges Fair Work Commission for minimum wage increase above inflation. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The Albanese government submitted to the Fair Work Commission's annual wage review asking for an economically sustainable real wage increase for 2.7 million minimum wage and award-reliant workers in Australia. About 2.7 million Australians, roughly a quarter of the nation's workforce, are on the national minimum wage or award-reliant jobs. The current minimum wage is $175.40 per week, higher than when the Albanese government took office in 2022. The Fair Work Commission's upcoming decision on the minimum wage will take effect from July 1. The Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, raised the official cash rate to 4.1% on March 17, marking the second consecutive hike in 2026. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states the government's submission suggests an increase consistent with underlying inflation returning to the RBA's 2 to 3% target band in 2026 to 27, while ABC notes the government's submission is ambiguous about what constitutes a real increase and does not rely on forward-looking inflation targets. News Kamau reports the current minimum wage is $175.40 per week, higher since 2022, but ABC does not mention this specific figure or comparison. ABC highlights that the Fair Work Commission's 2025 determination, 3.5%, was based on RBA confidence that inflation would fall below 3%, but News Kamau does not reference this historical context or the Commission's past decisions. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Daily Cherry Evans returned to Manly Warringah as a Rooster amid the club's early season struggles. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Daily Cherry Evans made his first appearance for the Roosters at Brookvale Oval against Manly Warringah Sea Eagles in the 2026 NRL season opener for both teams. The match took place despite a severe storm causing power cuts and heavy rain just before kickoff, with lightning and flash flooding reported. Manly Warringah Sea Eagles led 10-8 at half-time after two long-range tries, one by Jake Trbojevic, 90m, and one by Tulu Kula, despite having only 9 tackles in the Roosters' half. Cherry Evans was booed by Manly fans throughout the game, including during warm-ups, team introductions, and on-field runs, with chants like "Cherry's a wanker" heard. Manly Warringah started the 2026 season with a 0-3 record, with all losses occurring at Brookvale Oval. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states the Roosters had 49 tackles in Manly's half, while Articles 2 and 3 do not mention this specific number or detail. Article 1 mentions the Roosters had 15 players to choose from and lists specific injuries: Billy Smith off, Hugo Savola on, Egan Butcher failed HIA, but Articles 2 and 3 omit these details. Article 1 describes the Roosters' first tackle in Manly's half occurring at 2015, which is not referenced in Articles 2 or 3. This story was covered by ABC News. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. AFL umpire error controversy in Geelong vs Adelaide match where a free kick was incorrectly awarded. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The AFL admitted Geelong was incorrectly awarded a last disposal free kick in the fourth quarter of the match against Adelaide on Thursday night at Cardinia Park. Tom Atkins, Geelong, was involved in a contested boundary incident with Zach Taylor, Adelaide, where the ball appeared to come off Atkins' boot before he scooped it up and kicked it out of bounds. The AFL Review Centre, ARC, did not have time to intervene on the free kick decision before the ball came back into play. Geelong won the match by 8 points, 9.14, 68, to 9.6, 60. This is the 5th time in 4 seasons the AFL has admitted a late umpiring mistake went against Adelaide in close losses. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC does not mention the term stooged used by David King in Thiege to describe Atkins' actions on the boundary. Thiege includes a detailed description of the ball's trajectory. The ball appeared to come off Atkins' boot, while ABC does not provide this specific detail. ABC does not mention the Crows' superior ball use or Zach Taylor's 3 goals in the first 3 quarters as emphasized in Thiege. This story was covered by ABC News and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Nicolas Maduro's federal court appearance in New York for narco-terrorism charges. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Nicolas Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores are scheduled to appear in a Manhattan federal court on Thursday, the 14th of March, 2019, for a narco-terrorism case. Maduro and Flores were captured by U.S. Special Forces in Caracas on the 3rd of January, 2021 during a pre-dawn raid that reportedly killed 100 people. Maduro and Flores pleaded not guilty during their 5th of January arraignment in New York. Maduro and Flores are being held in a Brooklyn detention center and have not requested bail. Prosecutors allege Maduro spearheaded a corrupt government that protected and promoted illegal activity, including drug trafficking. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian, Article 1, states OFAC initially granted a waiver for Venezuela's government to fund Maduro's defense but later reversed it, while OFAC claims the initial waiver was an administrative error and was amended immediately. The Guardian, Article 3, mentions Maduro's court appearance was on the 14th of March, 2019, but the other articles, Guardian 1 and ABC, indicate it occurred in early 2021, January-February. The ABC article states Trump explicitly warned of more charges against Maduro during the hearing, but the Guardian articles do not mention this as a direct statement from Trump during the court proceedings. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian government underwrites fuel imports amid Middle East tensions and shortages. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced new fuel security powers on Saturday to underwrite purchase of additional shiploads of fuel, ABC, Guardian. The government will amend the Export Finance and Insurance Corporation Act to grant new fuel security powers, ABC, Guardian. Shortages have been reported at hundreds of service stations, particularly in New South Wales and Queensland, ABC, Guardian. The government will use public funds to underwrite the purchase of extra fuel to stabilise supply during Middle East tensions, ABC, Guardian. Independent distributors have struggled to secure enough supply from major companies, affecting regional Australia, ABC, Guardian. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports the government insists shortages are caused by panic buying, while The Guardian does not mention panic buying as a cause. ABC states the opposition called for a 53% cut to the fuel excise tax, but The Guardian does not mention this specific percentage or demand. ABC quotes Energy Minister Chris Bowen saying Australia has more than a month's worth of fuel in reserve, while The Guardian does not provide this specific reserve figure. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. ABC staff strike and new pay offer negotiations after 24-hour walkout. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The ABC experienced a 24-hour strike last week involving over 1,000 journalists and staff, the first in 2 decades. ABC Managing Director Hugh Marks met with MEAA and CPSU delegates at the Fair Work Commission on Tuesday following the strike. The new pay offer includes annual increases of 4% in the first year, 3.25% in the second, and 3.25% in the third year, with back pay from October 1, 2025. The updated offer includes clearer progression pathways between pay bands, targeted performance bonuses, retention of existing promotion provisions, and enhanced leave entitlements. The ABC has approximately 4,500 staff, with more than 1,000 participating in the strike. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states the unions rejected an earlier offer for including no increase to pay, but ABC's article describes the previous offer as including a 3.5% pay rise in the first year. News Kamau does not mention the ABC apologizing to audiences for the strike's disruption, while ABC's article explicitly states Hugh Marks apologized to audiences. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Former AFL player Nick Stevens convicted of fraud in pool installation scheme. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Nick Stevens was found guilty on 12 counts of obtaining a financial advantage by deception and 1 charge of using a false document in the County Court of Victoria, ABC, News Kamau. Stevens was remanded in custody until his plea hearing on May 21, 2024, ABC, News Kamau. The case involved 6 families in Mildura, Victoria, who were defrauded of a total of $170,000 to $171,000 for pools they never received or had illegally installed, ABC, News Kamau. Stevens pleaded not guilty to all 14 fraud-related charges, ABC, News Kamau. Judge Fiona Todd denied an extension of Stevens' bail, stating she was unconvinced he should remain on bail, ABC, News Kamau. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports Stevens was 45 years old at the time of the trial, while News Kamau states he was 46, ABC versus News Kamau. ABC mentions Stevens had financial difficulty towards the end of 2017, while News Kamau states he had stopped working on projects by early 2018, ABC versus News Kamau. ABC reports Stevens' defense argued he tried to fix them after realizing he couldn't complete the jobs, while News Kamau does not include this specific phrasing, ABC versus News Kamau. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australia's 2026 Daylight Saving Time end and clock change details. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Daylight saving ends on Sunday, April 5, 2026, in NSW, Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania, the ACT, and Norfolk Island. Clocks turn back 1 hour at 3 a.m. local time to 2 a.m. on April 5, 2026, giving residents an extra hour of sleep. Queensland, Western Australia, the Northern Territory, Christmas Island, and the Cocos, Keeling, Islands do not observe daylight saving. Daylight saving begins again on Sunday, October 4, 2026, in participating states. The change occurs on the first Sunday of April annually, coinciding with Easter in 2026. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between sources for verifiable factual claims. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Sydney private school teacher charged with grooming and child abuse material offences. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Benjamin David Collinge, 29, a casual teacher at Newington College in Sydney, was arrested on March 28, 2024, and charged with using a carriage service to groom someone under 16 and accessing child abuse material. Collinge allegedly posed as a 17-year-old boy to contact a 14-year-old girl on social media, pressuring her to send sexually explicit images in exchange for money. The girl was not known to Collinge, and her parents reported the communications to NSW police on March 21, 2024, leading to the investigation. Police searched Collinge's Beecroft home and allegedly found child abuse material on his electronic devices. Collinge was refused bail at Burwood Local Court and remanded in custody until his bail hearing on April 2, 2024. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two sources. This story was covered by ABC News and Sydney Morning Herald. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. King Charles III state visit to the US amid Iran war tensions and political backlash. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. King Charles III and Queen Camilla will visit the US as a state visit between April 27 and 30, 2025, per both sources. The visit is the first by a British monarch to the US in nearly 20 years, following Queen Elizabeth II's 2007 trip, per both sources. King Charles is expected to address the US Congress during the visit, per both sources. Donald Trump confirmed the visit on Truth Social, stating he greatly respects the king and looks forward to meeting him, per both sources. France, Spain, and Italy have restricted US military airspace or denied landing rights for US warplanes over Iran war operations, per both sources. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC states Trump called UK aircraft carriers toys and unwanted last week, but The Guardian does not quote this exact criticism. ABC reports Trump's Truth Social post urging the UK to go and get their own oil from the Strait of Hormuz, while The Guardian only mentions contempt without this specific quote. ABC includes the 250th anniversary of American independence as a key event during the visit, but The Guardian does not mention this detail. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis.